Hi, my name is Babu Karsi. Welcoming you to another edition of the Viewpoint, coming to you on QTV. If you're joining us for the first time, the Viewpoint is a special platform where we invite Gambians, of course non-Gambians, but to talk about latest, of course, and things that would definitely improve or affect our lives within the country. On this special edition, we are talking about education. Yes, education. And of course, joining me are the members of the, how do I call it, Action on Education, and they are set to organize an education forum or a dialogue where stakeholders will be converged to talk about education in the country. With me, I have Na Sise Marena and of course Ade Darame. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Viewpoint.
Thank you. Pleasure being here.
I'll start with you, Na. Action on Education. You want to talk about education, how to improve education in the Gambia. Let me ask you, what is wrong with our education?
Well, I think the Action on Education is really a dialogue to find out what are the issues with education, and as well to get the ministry's perspective and other people's perspective on what is currently happening in education in the Gambia. So it's not so much as saying what is the problem and how are we going to fix it, but is there a problem? Where are those problems? What is already being done in terms of problem solving by the ministry, because the ministry has a lot of interventions that they're doing at the moment, and then also trying to see in terms of a collective solution, if you like, from all stakeholders, including parents, students, who are probably the most important stakeholders because it's their future we're talking about, as well as other private actors who are either in education or outside of the education field. So this dialogue is basically to have a conversation to find out collectively what can we do to improve the education system in the Gambia.
Is our education affected?
Sorry?
Is it affected? Do you have a problem with education right now from your own perspective? What is wrong with our education?
I think, you know, the dialogue will answer that. I think the dialogue will really answer what the quality issues are with education. And also what interventions are currently being done by MOPSI, because MOPSI is very active in terms of trying to find solutions and working out those solutions. And it's also a platform for MOPSI to come and communicate that, for parents to raise issues that they have with education, for students to raise issues. We're also trying to find out, is our education linked to the purpose of the children? Right now, the conversation is about child-centered education. So what kind of measures are being taken to make sure that our education is going towards global excellence in the century, and also to make sure that whatever purpose, individual, unique purpose our children have, that is being met by the education system.
Mr. Adi, let me come to you. We're talking about dialogue on education. This would have been done by the Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education. Who are you people? Who Action on Education? What do you do?
Well, I think the giveaway is in the name, Action on Education. And the reason we've called it that is that we're actually saying that everybody has a part to play. As a parent, I would not be happy just to say, I'm leaving my children's education to the government. I have a part to play. Everybody has a part to play. And you're asking now about, you know, is there a problem? We're not saying there's a problem, but every system can be improved. The day we start getting complacent and saying, oh, there's nothing wrong with education, let's just leave it as it is, then we have the problem. And so in terms of action on education, well, we don't want to come and just talk over these 2 days. We actually want to come up with actions that are going to improve the education system as it stands. And we're not being complacent. And as I said, it's not just, oh, you know, government are doing a good job or they're a bad job. It's not about a blame game. Far from it. We're just trying to make the point that not only does everybody have a part to play, but we want everybody to be involved in actually formulating it. Is there equity in education? Are our children learning the things that are going to make us a better country? Are there other countries that we can learn from? These are some of the things that we're looking at and that we'll be addressing over the 2 days. And
tell me a bit about Action on Education. Is this your first convergence you are planning to organize? Or
this will be the first event that we've organized, and we're a series of people who come from different backgrounds. Some of us are educationalists. Some of us are actually teachers in different ways. You know, for example, I go and talk to schools and, you know, I lecture in my own home country, Sierra Leone, and also sometimes in the UK. And, you know, some people have said to me, well, what's your concern with Gambia? Well, my father was born in Gambia and I've just moved permanently.
That was going to be my next question. Why Gambia?
My father was born here and I've actually myself have moved permanently to the Gambia. And so, you know, by the time my grandchildren come along, I want them actually to be taking part in an education system that actually prepares them to play an active role in society. And I think that's, you know, that's at the core of what it is we're trying to do.
Okay, and you're part of Gambia now, I'll call it. Now we can take you out. Since you're coming here, I'm sure this is not your first time. What are the things that you think definitely needs to be improved as far as our education sector is concerned?
Well, you know, sometimes I'm accused of being quite blunt. And if I'm honest, one of the things that happened, I came here over 3.5, nearly 4 weeks last year, over July and August. And whilst I was here, there were some education results that came out.
The WAEC results.
WAEC results. And we can pretend otherwise, or we can face the fact. All I had to do was probably bring out the newspapers from the time. And they were quite critical at the results, and people were really concerned. But to me, I think the concern was, I wouldn't say it was misdirected or misplaced, but it was simply about statistics. I think the questions we should have been asking are some of the questions we'll be addressing in this conference. Particularly, are we preparing our children for the future that will benefit the Gambia? And I'll give an example. You know, we have lots of people training and being qualified as lawyers. Actually, this country needs more engineers, structural engineers, architects, and so on, than we do lawyers. You know, I've got nothing against, my father's a lawyer. I even trained briefly in law school, so I've got nothing against lawyers. But I think sometimes in Africa, and certainly in Gambia, there's a kind of misplaced emphasis on the things that we should be training people for the future of the country.
I'll come back to you in a while. Let me turn back to Madam Sise. We can sit here and, you know, outline a lot of, you know, problems our education sector is facing, but let's do away a bit from the forward rules coming. Let's talk as Gambians. What do you think is the possibility, is always the solution to fix the problems that our education sector is facing right now, particularly from the grassroots? Because comparing education then, in the 70s, 80s, where an A-level student can go straight into universities in Europe and America, it's not happening anymore. No one talks about it. What do you really think is the problem that needs to be fixed, the short-term problems now?
Thank you for that, Miss Morena. So I think one of the, you know, there is no short-term approach to solving what we deem to be the education problems. And I think that's something that MOPSI is also working on. These interventions have to be long-term. They need to be tested. They need to come not only from one arm or one stakeholder, but from a group of stakeholders. Now, if you ask me what is possible in education, I'd say that we're a small nation and with a lot of children, so a lot is possible. We can really transform education if we look at what is called current best practice in education, which is really child-centered methods, and we align that to our vision as a nation. So what is our nation's vision? What is each individual child's purpose? Because it's difficult to come and put education on someone without looking at what their purpose is. I believe strongly that everybody that comes here on the earth has a purpose, a unique purpose. It's not for all of us to be lawyers, like Ade said. Each one of us has a need to fulfill. Now, if we align that need with the education that we are providing to the children, it's possible for everybody to succeed in their own way. So I think that's what, you know, if you ask me what's possible, I say global excellence is possible. But global excellence cannot come about unless all of us work together to find solutions. Now, to answer your question about why in the 70s everyone was able to go to university, I think there's one of the things that we sort of compare is like for unlike. In the 70s, there was a lot of inequity in terms of who got access to schools. We can see from Sadauda Karibajora's book, The First President, that he had to leave his village to come to Banjul to access education. Now, that wasn't in the 70s, maybe a little earlier. But one of the biggest things that happened, there's been 3 education reforms in the Gambia. One of the biggest things that MOPSI and the ministry have been working on is on access, so that every child can have access to education.
Because the quantity has been expanded.
Exactly. So more children have access to education. Now the next step is quality and also equity of that access. So quality in that we need to work in terms of our teachers, and some interventions are being done. The quality of our teacher training. But then again, one of the things that we talk about, so in the 70s, we had some really good teachers. I think now we have really impressive young teachers as well. But how many of us really choose to work within an education sector? How many of us say, I want to work as a teacher? Would you work as a teacher?
He's putting my son back to me.
I mean, you know, it's a valid question to ask. How many, I've heard time and time again, I was at St. Augustine's recently having a career talk, and I asked in the classroom, in a room of about maybe 300 students, like, who would consider teaching for 2 years after they've graduated. And I had one student putting their hands up. I went into a classroom of doctors, of would-be doctors, and, you know, through rhetoric, I was able to get to them, to convince them that maybe teaching is a noble profession. But when we start to hold teaching as noble as being a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, etc., then we can start to attract the quality candidates we need for teaching. You know, teaching is a sacrifice, is a personal sacrifice that people have to make here. So there's different, you know, if you ask me what the education problem is, the root causes are many, you know, and all of us stakeholders who are coming together have a role to play. It's not just MOPSI's problem. You know, the quality issues are not just MOPSI's problems. What is the role that parents are playing? What is the role that communities are playing? What is the role that businesses are playing? You know, everybody has a role to play, you know, in education.
Talking about teachers, I want us to just, excuse me, to just stop by and talk about teachers. You talked about quality teachers that we used to have then, you know, compared to now, where we have young, vibrant, energetic young gentlemen and women that want to go into the education field. But the quality of teachers that we now you know, disperse in schools, particularly in urban areas, because when we talk about, most of us, we want to stay in the combos and teach, you know, but again, going to the urban areas where facilities are not, you know, there. The schools are there, yes, but facilities for teachers, you know, to live comfortable and teach is not there. Most of us will not want to go to the rural areas to teach. You know, these are all things that are lacking, and you go to a college for 6 weeks and you are taken as a TT. It's not helping. Those are things that we should talk about before the forum and other things.
But no, if I can jump in, I think those are things that we will talk about at the forum, because we're trying to address everything. And as you say, touched on it, the thing is, we want to make teaching a noble profession once again. I am old enough to have gone to school in the 1960s. And actually, when I was going to school, I wanted to be a teacher. Why did I want to be a teacher? First of all, my father was a lawyer, and I thought, you know, I kind of felt intimidated by the fact and his reputation. But the next best thing I thought was, oh, you know, I had teachers who inspired me. They brought me out of my shell. I used to be quite shy and so on. And I thought, this is something I want to do. But what tended to happen as time got, first of all, if you look at the population growth, both in Gambia and in Sierra Leone, you then had the situation where somebody became a member of parliament or National Assembly, and they thought, first thing I'm going to do is build a school in my constituency, in my area. And then they then staff these schools with people who are not really properly qualified. It's not about quantity. It really is about quality. Because if you look at it, I've come here and I've gone to classes where they have 60 children in a class. There's no way you can get quality.
With one teacher.
With one teacher teaching a class of 60. And so how do we address that? And as we rightly say, when we elevate teaching to the level of doctors and lawyers, then we will start to get serious. For me, and this is something I've said in Sierra Leone, and I'll say it here, education to any nation is actually more important than the defense. We should be spending 10 times more on education than we do on defense. Why do I say that? You look around Gambia, there are loads and loads of Chinese people coming here and building infrastructure. They're building roads, they're building bridges. Why? Because we don't have, and we don't train people to become structural engineers. That's a profession in itself. We shouldn't be importing anybody from anywhere. We should actually be building that ourselves. So we're not talking about building rockets to send people to the moon. We're talking about roads, we're talking about bridges, basic infrastructure. And we're bringing people from halfway across the world to come and do it. And of course the Chinese, you know, just to say, they probably laugh. And you know, this is a big thing that we're talking about education, and you're talking, you know, the task is big, but you know, they have the saying that even the longest journey starts with a single step. This is that step. At least that's what we think.
Marine, I want to come back to you. How has the response from the ministry been, both basic and higher education? Are they even aware of this?
I have heard from my colleagues that MOPSI is aware, certainly, and we've reached out to the Gambia College and Mohurst as well. I think MOPSI, we're in a really good position to have this action on education, because I think we've been gifted, if you like, with a change of government. We've been gifted with a new Gambia. We've been gifted with a PS, Sisawo, who is very responsive, who's very willing to listen, who's very willing to share what he knows and the interventions that MOPSI has. So I think it's been really, really positive. I think, you know, as Ade said, this dialogue is overdue. Because there's been efforts that have been happening in silos, but what has not happened yet is to have a collective group of people within a public forum, whether it's private employers or it's MOPSI or it's parents or it's students, because we never really ask students what they think of the education system, and they are the people who actually suffer the brunt of whether the education system is good or bad. So I think it's really important that we have you know, we have this dialogue to see what the next steps are. Again, it's an action. So I want to go back to your teacher recruitment and the quality of teachers. So what I didn't say that the quality of teachers we have now is worse than we had in the 70s. It's not an isolated issue that we can look at. The teachers that we produce are actually a result of the education system we have. So if we want to improve the quality of teachers, we need to improve the quality of education. And in order to improve the quality of education, we also need to improve the quality of teachers, if you like. And I think, you know, there are interventions that MOPSI is doing, including in-service training that we're aware of. You know, and I know Gambia College, I learned today, had a Tanzanian team that came in. Now, one of the nice things about Action on Education, I believe it's Gambian grown. These are us, Gambians, all of us, who are standing up and saying, we feel like we need a collective leadership on education. This is not just pointing fingers at teachers or salaries or MOPSI or parents. No, we all need to come together unified, in a unified way, to advocate for our children's future. And I think that's really what this is about.
And you think all the stakeholders you've mentioned will be available in the stakeholders forum?
I think not only will they be available, I think they're passionate to come.
And they're taking part.
Yes.
And so this is us. We've reached out to people. And I think people have realized that, as you say, keep saying that we all have a part to play, and they have a part to play, and we're saying it's not just up to them. All of us have this part to play. And so when we come together collectively, and I think that's the point, not in silos, not MOPSI having a conference there, another lot of people having a conference there. We're all coming together. And so the first day, and it's worth mentioning, there are 2 days. And on the first day, you have what we would call, you know, the main stakeholders who can implement policy. So people from the schools, the colleges, the ministry, they will all be there. And on the second day, as well as reporting on what they discussed, we will have everyone else, parents, teachers, the general public. They can come, they can ask questions, and we want people to ask
education
tough
veterans
questions.
around. You know?
Well, this is it.
I hope you're in contact with them. We have them.
Many. I mean, many. And many of them are taking part in both days. And so it's very much a collective effort, because what we want to produce are productive citizens for the future who can actually contribute to the benefit of this country. And so I guess the core question we're asking everybody is that, are we educating people to make tomorrow's Gambia and the day after tomorrow's Gambia, the Gambia of the future? Are we educating people for that? And if not, how can we do so? And those are some of the tough questions that will come up. And as I said, it's not just about talking, it's actually coming up with short, medium and long-term things, commitments that people will be held to, and they will be monitored. So we keep insisting it's not a talking shop. If you think it is, don't come. But if you think you can contribute properly, adequately to the betterment of this nation, then come along, let your voice be heard.
Let me take you back to the letter I've received from Action Education. You made mention of some bullet points like access, equity, quality, relevance in learning outcomes. Equity, do we have a problem here? What do you mean by equity? In what sense?
Well, I mean, equity about the fairness of, you know, if I have a lot of money, I can send my child to an expensive fee-paying school, Or if I'm a parent, I can say, I don't think my girl child needs an education. I'll marry her off at, that's about equity and inequity. Only boys should do this. Only boys should do engineering. Only, you go to some countries, you go to Cape Verde, you go to Sierra Leone, and you see women who are engineers and architects working on government buildings. It probably happens here, but probably not as much. And so, in terms of the equity, is there fairness in who gets to be educated? And we're saying that equity means everybody should get a fair chance of getting an education, because every nation, you go to countries where they have 100% or 99% education, those are the countries that progress. They don't discriminate, oh, a boy can do this, a girl can do that, and so on. And so in terms of equity, of course, that's...
But I don't think we are faced with that problem anymore. It used to be a problem, when parents would refuse to send their maybe girl child to school, but not anymore. I think Gambians now at least 90. I would rate them 90% maybe.
If you're talking about the theory, yes. But let's talk about the practice. Because of this, I've been here since beginning of January, and I've gone around, and you see people who say to you, I'm going to get my daughter to work with my wife selling fruit in the market rather than sending her to school. I see it everywhere. So we can romanticize and say it's improved, but the reality on the ground, it still is something that we need to address. And we need to say to parents, your girl child needs as much access to education as your boy child. Treat them equally. She might be cleverer than your son. Why is she the one going to the market, working with the mother? We need to address these things. As you say, we like to think it's changed, but I think the reality is we still need to address it, and we still need to make sure that people stay on point. I think Nasise wants to come in here.
I think one of the biggest questions in terms of equity, I think for me, is where do the wealthy go to school? Are there wealthy children, the children of wealthy parents, are they going to public schools? Or are they choosing to go to private schools like Marina? I think those are just questions that we can ask ourselves. Wherever you see a nation has a great education system, the public school system is excellent.
But no wealthy man will want to take his child to a public school, knowing the system that we have right now.
Right, so then we don't have equity. Because if we have equity, it will mean that our public schools are just as good or even better than the private schools. Yeah. If you look at excellent education systems like Finland, their public schools are, they're the #1 choice for parents, as opposed to private education. People go to private education for other reasons, but not because public education will not do. So when we talk about equity here, even when we talk about girls, although a lot has been done, again, in terms of girls' education, there's still differences in grade 8 exams for between girls and boys. Up until grade 8, girls and boys perform almost the same. But once they reach that grade 8, then there's issues with equity. We have things, and then although there's a gender unit at MOPSI, a lot of things are needing to be done. And it's how do we look at best practice globally so that we can make sure that everybody has access? Because it's no good if we have 20% of Gambians going to Oxford. It's no good. And then the rest are failing. And that's what was happening in the 70s. It's just that we had a good number of people who were going to Oxford, who were going to Cambridge, etc. So we thought our education system was good, but people still did not have access. So you can't talk about quality without talking about equity. If you talk about quality education, it means that every child has access to an excellent education. And I think that's a reasonable demand. We're 54 years old. I think that's a reasonable demand.
I think this will take, honestly, a marathon years, before to achieve such things, because improving our public education system will definitely take years and years and years, and it's good that you guys have taken the stepping stone.
I'm sorry, I think it will take years if we leave it just to one silo. If parents say, oh, it's the government's problem, and if you say, I won't be a teacher, I'll be a presenter, you still haven't answered my question. If I say it's not my problem, I can send my child to Marina, and if Ade says, well, I'll just go to Sierra Leone or to England, then it will be an issue. And that's what this Action on Education is about on the 1st and 2nd of March. Actually, ineducation or inequality or the lack of quality is everybody's problem. And unless we start to take that problem seriously, unless we start to sit with MOPSI, unless we start to sit with communities and parents, because the answers to the problems in our education system cannot only be found in one place. They can be found with the young teachers, the veteran teachers, they can be found with the private school owners, the public school teachers, they can be found with the government or with business people who end up having the end product of the education system. But it really needs to be a collective leadership action. It's no good in August for all of us to go, oh my God, the results are terrible. It's no good. All of us have a role to play. You have a role to play, Adi has a role to play, I have a role to play, your cameraman has a role to play. We all have a role to play. When you say that it's a long term, you know, Finland transformed their education system in less than a decade. They were able to transform their education system. And there is no reason why a country of 2 million people, if we all come together and say, we're going to support education, there's no reason why we can't. You know, in the US, we have private money going into education. We have private charters. Whether it's good or bad, you know, there's a debate as to that. But we have a lot of, it's not just left to the government to improve education. And I think this is one of the things we need to get out of our minds, that whenever there's a problem, it's for MOPSI to fix, because that's not the case. You know, if my child is failing, it's my problem. It's our community's problem. It's the government's problem. It's everybody. It's the diaspora's problem. But unless we stop pointing fingers and coming up with solutions, we won't have an answer to our problem. And I think that's what we've been doing for a while. So it's important. I hope to see you at the dialogue for us to have this conversation and come up with solutions.
A year or two ago, when WAEC announced the results for Gambia, a lot of fingers were pointed at the Minister of Basic and Secondary Education for not doing a good job. And that takes me to the roles of parents. Because the honest truth is most of our parents don't care. The only thing they can do is provide uniforms for their girl child, or boy child, go to school, give you lunch, and that's it. They don't want to know the outcome. What are you doing? If you're concentrating in class or not, if you're passing tests or stuff, you know. And that takes me to the roles of parents, you know, in, you know, for making sure that their children are educated and, you know, they're not wasting their money.
You know, I think it's a misconception to think parents don't care. I think statistics show actually that households in the Gambia spend more than the sub-Saharan average in terms of sending their children to school.
Sending them is one thing.
Yes, not just sending them, because sending is it's an invested effort, right? So again, it's what do parents actually know about education? Because how informed and enlightened are our parents about education? What sort of role do they have to play? You know, it's different when someone comes and tells you, this is what you're being educated, as to whether you're being an integral part of your child's education, you know? So I don't think it's important. I don't think we could, again, you know, saying parents are not doing enough, government is not doing enough. That is not the solution. What we need to do is make sure that there's conversations between what the governments are doing and what the parents need to do, so that the parents know that this is my role. You know, parent education is really important. Everywhere that has an excellent education system, they actually take time to educate the parents. You know, the parents are part of a PTA. I know that the government has set up PTAs as part of their minimum basic standards, you know. But all of these things, like I said, it's a collective effort. We can't point we can't point to parents as being the issue. We can't point to students as being the issue or to teachers as being the issue. We need to make sure that everybody has the information that they need. All the stakeholders are coming together to make education better. And parents do have a role to play. That is true. Parents have a role to play. And I'm sure if they're informed about what that role is, they will play it.
There we go. Definitely. Well, Sina agrees that they have a role to play.
No. I mean, and they are playing it. A lot of the parents are playing it, you know.
And I wanted to come in there because I'm a parent myself. And because of that, and as a result of doing this, I go around and speak to parents. And it's interesting you say that they don't care, because I have not met a single parent who says, I don't care about my child's education. So if they don't, if they're not being nonchalant and they do care, why are they not being engaged? Is it that the schools are not reaching out to them in the right way? Are we still using the same old ways? Oh, here's a letter, take it to your parents, ask them to come to the PTA. Perhaps we need to go into the communities rather than say, here's the school, come and meet us on such and such an evening. We need to go out to the community and say, okay, tonight parents who are in this area and have children going to our school, we're here to meet you on your ground. Here are some of the things that we want to talk to you about. I think we need to be creative about, we can't sit, back in the old days they sent a letter. These days they probably want to send you a text or something. But no, reach out to the parents in a way, go on the radio, go on TV and say to them, if you care about your child's education, go along to these meetings, take part in what is happening, because what do you want your child to be? Do you want your child to be a lawyer, doctor, architect, soldier, police, whatever the case may be? Involve the parents in a way where you draw them or you meet them halfway, rather than sit there and wait for parents to come to you. You organize a PTA meeting, you have some drinks and some cakes, and then you say, oh, it's 8 o'clock, only 10 people have come through the door. Why? Perhaps you have not reached out to them in the right way. And those are the things that we need to think about and we need to address. And these are some of the things that we hope will come through in this about, we want people who are headmistresses and headmasters to come along and say, yes, we've held successful PTA meetings. Share some of that best practice with everybody else who's there. Why was it successful? What did you do that the others weren't doing to get parents involved? Parents have a massive role to play in the education of their children, probably bigger than the kind of formal education they have when they go to school. Because when they come, ask them, have you got homework? What did you do today? Care about it,
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Well, this is it. And as I said, I've not met a single parent who says, oh, I don't care. But then when I asked them, when was the last time you asked your child if they had homework? None of them could remember.
Exactly.
So, there's a kind of disconnect somewhere between, what they claim and what many of them do. But they care. They care.
I think, just to come in there a little bit, I think MOPSI actually does do a good role of bringing in parents, whether it's they have radio shows that they have community dialogues. A lot of their policies are formulated with the community. I think more of that needs to happen. I think more of bringing people together needs to happen. Some of the best insight I've had on education has come from women who live in Soma, who themselves are not educated, but they can tell you what the purpose of education is. They can tell you the need for equity for their girls. They can tell you about the quality of education and how it differed from back then to now. So they have a lot of insight, and this is why this dialogue on the 1st and 2nd of March is so important, because we're bringing in everybody, whether it's women in Soma who are welcome to come on the 2nd, or it's people from MOPSI, or it's parents like us, or private school owners. So it's like, come and find out what's happening at MOPSI. Let's MOPSI learn what's happening in your communities on a day-to-day basis. What is your anxiety with your children? Why are you finding out from the children, why are they struggling? Unless we communicate and we constantly have those dialogues, we cannot move forward, which is the purpose.
And you're talking about Soma, I was going to ask, why other hotel around the Senegambias, what would the stakeholder in Basse think of then? I think decentralization wise.
This is a good question in equity, and definitely something to consider in the future. But we have to start somewhere. And, I think that people have gone out and spoken to people from across the country to find out what their ideas are about the dialogue, what their ideas are about education. So although the dialogue on the 1st and 2nd is happening in protocolally, I think a lot of conversations have gone on around the country as to what needs to happen with our education system.
Yes, because if I can come in there, one of the things we've done is we've gone around the country and we've actually interviewed people. So for those who come along, you'll see video clips of people that we've interviewed across the country. Okay. Some of them are students, some of them are teachers, some of them are parents, talking about what matters. And I keep going on about thinking creatively, and I trained as a journalist, and so communication is very much part of what I care about. And so this is the first of its kind, and we hope in years to come, for those who can't travel, we can Skype them in. They can join in. We could provide the equipment for them to actually still take part in the dialogue, because this is not about lecturing or teaching. It's very much a dialogue. It's a two-way conversation. And so in years to come, we hope that, amongst other things, people can contact us, not just in the Gambia, but people who are Gambians or who are friends of Gambia outside of Gambia can join us by Zoom, by WhatsApp, by any other means, and also by things like Skype. Take part in the conversation, because we all have an interest in the betterment of our children's education and the future of the country.
The March dialogue will be the first of its kind, as you rightly mentioned.
I hope
Do you have plans of holding this annually?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things we want to do is we want to set short, medium, and long-term goals for people. Actions. I keep going back to the word action, and the only way we can do that is we monitor these and then we report back. So if we do nothing else, next year we want people to hold us to account and say, last year, 1st and 2nd of March, you said such and such. Have you delivered on those? We want to be able to say, this is what MOPSI said they were going to do. This is what a parents group said they were going to do. This is what the teachers from the schools, the Gambia Teaching Union said. This is what the ones at the university said they were going to do.
There'll be follow-ups after the dialogue.
There'll be follow-ups. And so we hope that, because it would be a shame if this just ends up being a one-off thing, because education is not a one-off. You and I will learn something new today that will benefit us. We might not even be aware of it until it benefits us. So you learn something new every day. So you can't have a conference like this and just say, oh, it's a one-off. We come up with some fancy, report at the end of it and then rest there. It is the start of a journey, and I think we have to keep making that point. That's why I say I hope we'll be the first of many. And I think in 20 years' time, all we're saying is that we have somebody who's president of this country saying, you know what, the education system in my country is so good that I'm not going to go abroad for healthcare. You have a minister saying, I'm not going to send my child to a university abroad because the health system that we've had for the last 20 years is so good, and the education system we've had is so good that my children are going to be educated here. Our doctors are going to be trained here. That's what we need to be thinking about. You're talking about size. Do you realize Jamaica is only slightly bigger than this country? The population of Jamaica is only 700,000 more than the population, unless you say Jamaica to everybody, almost anywhere in the world. They've heard of Jamaican music, they've heard of Jamaican artists, athletes, and so on. We can produce. So let's not use small as an excuse. And Jamaican universities, some of the best in the West Indies. So smallness is a lame excuse, and we shouldn't be using it.
Action on education. Of course, members, I'm a special guest on the Viewpoint, in case you're just joining us. And they are organizing a national dialogue on education in this country, where they will, of course, gather stakeholders for a 2-day convergence, where they're looking into the pros and cons of education and possible solutions to better our education system. Action on education. Where are you getting your fundings from? Who are these people involved in it? You're talking about going around the nation, talking to people, and who is behind this? If
you look at it, most of it has come from Paradise Foundation. But also, at the bottom of our press release, we've got MOPSI, the ministry are also...
Both ministries, higher education and basic education.
And so we've also reached out to businesses and to get them to fund things like drinks, water on the day, refreshments and so on. So we've reached out, and it's when you do that that you realize that actually everybody realizes that education matters. Because you walk into a bank and you say to somebody, or you walk into one of the hotels here, you challenge them and say, why have you got so many non-Gambians at the top management of, and they say, oh, we don't have the qualified Gambians. We don't want them to be able to use that excuse. But it shows that those people care enough to actually want to get involved in helping fund this. So, at the bottom of one of our releases, I wish I had it here, we've got a whole plethora of all the people who've actually contributed in terms of it's a partnership, and so that partnership also sort of plays into the whole thing of the dialogue, working in partnership with people to achieve desired outcomes, and that's pretty much where we are. We want anybody who wants to sponsor, either you fund food, drinks, or whatever on the day, we will, of course, will accept that.
That takes me to my next question. Someone just watching, or maybe a parent that is, so much into, cares about education and the development of education in the country, may want to be part of this stakeholders conference. How and what are the mechanisms of one being part of it?
I think we have a phone number which we can post after. Also, there's a dialogue on the 2nd of March. The dialogue is a 2-day process. So on the 2nd of March, we're welcoming anybody who is concerned about education, Gambian, non-Gambian, involved in education directly or not involved in directly, to come in on the 2nd of March and join the conversation about education transformation in this country.
Is there any fee attached? I need to pay something?
There's no fee.
No fee
It's
at
completely
all.
open.
Okay.
And also, for those who use social media, there's a Twitter account, Action on Education, and also Facebook, where people can actually interact and get
Action
information.
on Education.
Action on Education.
Okay.
So if you belong to either of those, you can just go on there, type Action on Education, and you'll see there are lots and lots of things there. In fact, for those, we've been using them quite a lot because people have been interacting with us on Twitter and also on Facebook. So they're all sort of mini posters and mini flyers about the event. And just kind of some of what we've captured. I said we went around the country, and so people can see some of what we've captured around the country from speaking to people, what they've said about why education matters to them and why education matters to the country.
What do you aim to achieve after the forum, the National Dialogue?
Well, after the forum, I'm one of those people who keep saying that, again, I keep mentioning my age because I've attended lots and lots of conferences across Africa, 20 different countries across Africa, and many of them, you leave the conference, there's a feeling of elation and euphoria. Oh, you think to yourself, wasn't that a great conference? And then a year later, nothing. 2 years later, absolute silence. We don't want that to be the case here. We keep on banging on about this point. We want it to be a case where we come up with some of the things that we're going to put in place to address, as we're saying, somebody should be able to say in 3, 4, 5 years time, yes, I have a lot of money, but I'm actually going to send my children to a public school because it's as good as any. That's the position and that's the situation we want to be in. We know it's not going to happen overnight. We're not deluded. We know that this is something that we need to work on, but unless we work on it, it will never happen. So we can either throw back our hands and say, oh my gosh, you know, the problem is too big, let's not deal with it, or we tackle it. And what we're doing is tackling it.
Okay, you want to comment?
Yes,
on it?
I
Okay.
think after this dialogue, like Ade said, what we're looking is for action. And that action comes from the information that we've received on the dialogue. I think it's important to understand what interventions are in place, what is the current reality of the education system, what is being done, how can that be complemented by parents, schools, private or public, teachers, young people, old people who want to go into education, and then how do we move forward as a nation to make our education system one of the best in the world. So I'm hoping that we come up with actionable points that are smart, you know, that we can really push forward and make a change, a real change for our children, because I think that change should happen now.
Well,
and we've already shown that we've already shown as a Gambian people that we are capable of change, that it doesn't, it doesn't have to happen in 50, 60 years. It can happen sort of with one vote. So we're hoping that it's similar to that.
It took us 22 years, don't forget. It wasn't, you think it,
when we were ready, we were ready.
Well, do you have a lifespan for this, or a target that, come 2025, we should definitely achieve our dreams of organizing these,
I think at this point it's unrealistic to say what the lifespan of this would be or when we should be able to achieve this without hearing. I think this dialogue is a listen and learn. I think after that, then we can get all the information we have, all the interventions that are possible, all the other gaps that exist and who can fill them and how they can fill it. Then we can come up with a plan. I think we're going to come up with a plan to say that this is what we're going to do together, all the stakeholders, and this is when that will be achieved. Yeah. But that will definitely be published. Maybe you can invite us again to talk about it, or some of our colleagues to talk about when that will happen.
Absolutely, and you can't prejudge what's going to happen, because then what's the point of having the dialogue? And so depending on what comes out of the dialogue, and this is something that I've always believed in, and I'll tell a very short story. There was a British MP who went to Sierra Leone to she was an engineer by profession, and because she knew of an area called Waterloo in her constituency, somebody mentioned to her quite casually, oh, there's a Waterloo in Sierra Leone. And so she went there, and she was telling me the story herself. And she said when she'd driven around, she was thinking, gosh, there's so many things I could do to improve the quality of life for people in this place. And there was going to be a town hall meeting the next day, headed by the mayor. And then her husband said something to her. He said, I know you have the best intentions, but have you asked them what they want?
Yes.
And that's why a lot of things fail. Because a lot of international organizations and so on, they come with an agenda. This is what we're going to do for Gambia. This is what we're going to do for Gambians. We don't want to be in that position. We want to ask each other, what do we want for ourselves? Otherwise, what's the point? Unless you ask people what they want, you won't know what they want. And just to finish that story, she was going to build all sorts of bridges and pipes and so on. What did they want? They wanted a library.
Oh.
And that was the furthest thing from her mind. But it was what they wanted. And so you need to speak to people. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to be speaking to each other. What do we want for our children or for the future of our country?
In my last conversation with the DPS of Education, Minister of Basic, Adaba Jimbojo, who told me in a country like the Gambia, where we struggle for resources, these two things can't go together, which is quality and quantity. And they were struggling, with both, but they had to drop one, which is quality, and go in for quantity by building schools in the length and breadth of the country, which they did. And again, the quality is having quality teachers, materials to fix it. Would you agree with me that finance will play a key role in trying to achieve what you are campaigning for?
It's a key role, but it's not the deal breaker. And I say this to people who know me have got fed up of me saying that Cape Verde is 350 miles off the coast of here. And yet the education system in Cape Verde is what you would have to describe as first world. Cape Verde's whole population is 880,000.
Less than a million, yeah?
And yet when I go to the schools and the universities, the standard is so high. And what have they got? They depend on tourism like us. And just speaking of tourism, Cape Verde 5 years ago had fewer tourists than Gambia. Now Cape Verde has 3 times the number of tourists we get in Gambia. Hasn't happened by accident, by design. You plan for these things. And what we want to do is plan for how we utilize resources and so on. If we say it's money driven and that's the only thing that's going to, people say, you talk about being creative. Well, think about other ways of doing things that aren't just reliant on money. Otherwise, you will always use money as an excuse or one of the reasons why you don't do certain things. We need to look and see how others have done it and what we can learn from them. But unless we keep looking at the money thing and saying it's going to prevent us, then we'll never do it. How have others achieved it? How has Cape Verde done it? How has Jamaica done it? Where they put so many resources towards education. How can we do it? It's not a kind of one size fits all, but we can learn from others.
Thank you, Ade. I really agree with what Ade said. We need to become creative. I think that is the key thing, because if we drop quality, we will never develop as a nation. And I think, there wasn't privy to the conversation you had with the DPS, but I think MOPSI's direction is quality. I think we're gone past the age, because now our children do not exist in a small Gambia. We live in a global environment where our children are competing for resources and access with people who are going to school in Finland or in the US with privileged people. So we need to do better. Where we lack money, we need to become doubly creative. I think sometimes when we just look at money, we miss out on some of the resources we have. Gambia exports talent at all levels. At all levels, whether it's lawyers, it's doctors. We have Gambians in key positions around the world serving other countries. I think it's time that we do tap into that, whether it's Gambians locally, Gambians in the diaspora, people who are friends of Gambia, like Ade said, even within MOPSI, the wealth of resources, the wealth of contextualized local knowledge is humongous. All we need to do is to bring that together. We can't afford to give poor children a poor education because they'll just get poorer. Education is one of the biggest indicators of success in the world. So we need to double on efforts. Wherever you've seen Estonia a few years ago beat Finland, Estonia was a really poor country. What did they do? By design, they were focused on improving their education system. Everywhere in the world, when we talk about the first world nations, one of the first things they did was work on their education system. Maybe there were some lapses in equity, but we can do different. We can do better. We do not need, I mean, I work in a Montessori school. I have a Montessori school. We do not need learning materials or textbooks for children to learn. We need to educate the adult so that the adult can find learning materials from trees, from sand, from stone. This is what we need to do. And, you know, maybe I'm coming up with solutions, which is really not the purpose of the dialogue. But when you said that we need to get creative, because if we don't have the money, we need to find other means of getting to our destination. You know, a lot of people who build major organizations have not had the money. They have had to bootstrap. When Amazon, one of the biggest companies in the world, had to bootstrap. And that's what we need to learn to do and do better. We need to work together. We need to bootstrap. We need to be creative. You know, learning about anything now is so easy because there's the internet, there's Google. You can learn to do everything except probably surgery. And even that's debatable. You know, you can learn to do so many things on Google. You no longer need to be like an expert in one area. You can go watch a YouTube video. And, you know, our children are already very efficient in things like that. There's the Khan Academy. There's so many things that we can do as a nation. So I think, and plus, you know, out of sub-Saharan Africa, we get a huge amount of our government budget on education. We have a lot of donor funding on education. You know, I think what we need to do is do away with excuses. Do away with excuses on quality. We just need to, there's no choice. I don't see any choice except if we want our country to grow, we need to improve on quality. And, you know, I believe that's very important for MOPSI. I've seen some of the interventions they're doing. And I think maybe even when we're stuck, that's why communication is so important. When you're stuck and you have someone else, if I'm stuck on how to do something, Adi might have experience from what he's done elsewhere. He can bring it in. You may have experience, maybe from being a student or from working and speaking to so many people. And with that collective effort, we can do it. But we need to have a vision that's greater than ours, greater than ourselves. And, you know, one of the biggest things that if there were no limitations, what would we do? And we need to start thinking of, in terms of limitations, stop thinking about limitations and think of what is possible. Because unless we see what's possible, we cannot get there.
You and I were around when WAEC announced the results of Gambian students, you know, were thousands. So I'll come to you shortly.
Yes, I was around.
As a Gambian, how did you feel? So you were very shocked. And what do you think really led to that?
I'm not shocked because I've had 2 years of it. The first year I was really shocked. So I guess on my part, what I did is I used to live abroad. I moved back here. I wanted my children to really have the upbringing that we have in Gambia. So when you talk about resources, that's one thing. There's a lot of things that are in the West that you don't have the benefit of in the West that you have in Gambia. And so when I wanted my children to come here, one of the biggest factors was education. Because my son was going to a really good school. So I thought, okay, I put my money where my mouth is, or my efforts, and then I started a school. So that was one of the things that I did. I started a school, which unfortunately contributes to inequity, but that's another issue. But then I started to get involved. When I saw that the WAEC results were good, I reached out to the Ministry of Education. I sit on the local education group. You know, I found them very responsive. I try and find out what interventions are possible. You know, I organized a couple of trainings to find out, you know, to get some people who were in the education sector, in the policy making sector, to come into those trainings and really learn. So I think this is not just me. I don't have a plethora of resources. I think this is what Action in Education is doing. This is what we need to do individually as Gambians, because the ministry is running around making policy and implementing things. You know, we need to also meet them halfway. They need to meet us halfway. It's no good that even with our lawyers or whoever, you know, I have a lot of lawyer friends, you know, we can go into the ministry and say, look, where do you need help? You know, what are you doing? How can we complement this? And I think unless we start to take that collective responsibility, because anyone can be shocked about results. We can go on social media and talk about it and then do nothing.
Nothing about it.
You know, and we've been doing nothing for a while, you know, so what we need to do is do something. So
and
this dialogue
the
is
accent,
the
you know,
yes.
the WEG results
Yes.
was, you know, the talking point in the country.
Because I think you've been driving at this for quite a while in part of the conversation, is that, you know, what were your reactions to the WEG results?
It sucked the whole nation.
And and it kind of, in a way, led to this. Because when I started going around and speaking to Gambian friends, one of the things I said to them is that we could all talk about this. We could complain about it. Are we going to do anything about it? Or are we just going to be picking up the phone, arguing about it on WhatsApp and so on? Or are we actually going to do something to address it? Are we so horrified, so concerned that we need to take action? And in a sense, those are the conversations that led, some of the conversations that led to where we are. But as I said, part of it is we wanted it not to be a kind of blame game. Oh, MOPSI are responsible for this, or this person or that sector are responsible for it. We all, as part of that conversation we were having, which was kind of prompted by those results, admittedly, but one of the conversations we had was like, well, let's do something about it. Let's not just talk about it. Let's not just complain about it. Anybody can complain. You see social media full of people complaining about anything and everything. Ask how many of those people complaining about things are actually doing something to address whatever it is they're complaining about. And we didn't want to be like that. We wanted to be doers rather than just talkers and complainers. And that's kind of what has led us to where we are today. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for honoring this invitation. It's education, it's everybody's business, being it the Gambian or non-Gambian residing in this country.
Indeed.
And they call himself Action on Education. I'm sure Action will speak louder than the voice of the conversation we had here. Well, viewers, that's all we have for time for today's edition of the Viewpoint. Again, I'm sure they're going to see the marketing department website. It's on the 1st and the 2nd of March. That's when they will have the dialogue, or you can go on social media and search Action on Education on Twitter, Facebook. That's a free publicity, no problem. Till I come your way next week, the same time and frequency, of course, the same TV station is QTV. Those of you that follow us on Q Radio on 103.3. My name is Babu Garcia. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.